staying informed today, it really can feel like a constant uphill battle, right?
It really can.
You want to understand what's happening, especially in areas, impacting our communities, but the sheer volume of information is just overwhelming sometimes.
Absolutely.
So for this deep dive, we're focusing on something pretty significant in higher education, a recent Dear Colleague letter from the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. And crucially, the immediate response right here at the Maricopa Community College District.
Yeah, the speed was notable.
We've got the OCR letter itself, Chancellor Gonzalez's communication, and a really detailed analysis from the Maricopa District's Committee on Academic Freedom.
Which provides a lot of context.
Right.
What's quite striking, as you mentioned, is the speed and just how comprehensive the OCR's guidance was.
Okay.
This Dear Colleague letter, it came out February 14th of last year, and it essentially gives a new interpretation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act.
Which is the big one about non-discrimination, right?
Right.
Race, color, national origin for places getting federal money.
Exactly. For any institution receiving federal funding.
Yeah.
And it lays out some very, very specific requirements.
Okay, let's try to unpack those requirements. Obviously, there's the baseline, comply with existing civil rights law. That's standard.
Sure.
But then the letter gets into some really specific prohibitions, like no longer using indirect methods or proxies to consider race in decision-making.
Right, no backdoor considerations.
And it also talks about cutting ties with third-party contractors if they're helping institutions kind of get around the rules about using race. Now, here's a point that really jumps out. The OCR explicitly says that treating students differently based on race to achieve goals like diversity or equity, well, that's now considered illegal, citing Supreme Court precedent.
That's a really key element. And the letter is very direct, very blunt in its assessment of DEI programs.
How so?
The OCR argues these programs can, in fact, stigmatize students who belong to particular racial groups based on crude racial stereotypes. That's the quote. So this perspective really challenges the widely held view of many DEI initiatives. It suggests efforts meant to promote inclusion could actually have unintended negative consequences, at least according to the OCR.
That's a fundamental part of their argument, then.
It is.
And this isn't just about who gets admitted, is it? I mean, the ban on using race in decision-making, that sounds incredibly broad.
It is extremely broad. It covers everything from admissions, hiring, promotions, financial aid, scholarships.
Even things like graduation ceremonies and student discipline.
Prizes, administrative support, housing, graduation ceremonies, discipline. It really sounds like it touches almost every corner of the campus experience.
Okay. High stakes involved here, clearly.
Precisely. And the potential consequences for not complying are substantial.
Loss of federal funding.
The OCR clearly states that, yes, loss of federal funding is on the table. And adding to the pressure was that very short time frame for enforcement, just 2 weeks after the letter was issued.
Only 14 days. That's intense.
It put significant pressure on institutions to react and react quickly.
Which brings us right to the Maricopa Community College District's reaction. Just 2 weeks later, February 28th, Chancellor Stephen Gonzalez sends out this important compliance updates email. And the changes announced were, well, quite far-reaching.
They were.
We saw the elimination of convocation ceremonies, right?
Yes.
New limits on professional growth funds, specifically for DEI-focused events tied to race, ethnicity, or national origin.
Correct.
And the cancellation of employee affinity group events centered on those categories, plus gender identity, too.
Yeah, when you look at the details in the Chancellor's email, you can see a very direct response to the OCR's directives.
It seems like they went point by point almost.
It does feel that way. And the changes go beyond just the big public-facing things.
Like what else?
Things like removing gender identity language from email signatures, business cards, discontinuing the Diversity Advisory Council and the related college councils. Also, a reevaluation of DEI-related positions, and even changes to things like bathroom and facility signage.
So a really comprehensive effort then.
Very comprehensive, yes. Trying to align the district's practices with this new interpretation of Title VI.
And the chancellor's reasoning was pretty straightforward, wasn't it?
Very clear. He cited the necessity, basically, to comply with the law and the enforcement guidance from regulatory agencies.
To avoid a federal investigation.
Exactly. And the potential loss of federal funding, which includes, crucially, student financial aid.
That really underscores the huge financial pressures involved for the district.
It absolutely does. However, it's also important to look at another piece of information that came out that same day, February 28th.
Oh, what was that?
The OCR also published a set of frequently asked questions, FAQs, that offer some, well, crucial context.
Okay, like what?
One key point they stressed is that the academic study of race, ethnicity, and national origin is explicitly not forbidden.
Ah, that's a really important distinction.
Yes, as long as these programs, these courses of study, are open to all students.
So you can't use race in a discriminatory way in the programs, but studying the topics themselves is okay if access is universal.
Precisely. And the OCR even stated they don't have authority over curriculum.
I imagine that provided some relief in academic circles.
I think it did, absolutely. And they also drew an interesting distinction between K-12 and higher education regarding what counts as a racially hostile learning environment, racial harassment.
How did they distinguish that?
Well, they gave examples relevant to elementary school, things like shaming kids based on race, calling them oppressors, saying they're less valuable, assigning guilt for historical actions, things like that.
Okay.
But the OCR suggested that similar themes discussed in a university classroom setting would be less likely to create that same kind of hostile environment.
Acknowledging the different nature of university discourse. More critical, maybe?
Exactly. Recognizing the more robust and critical nature of academic discussion at the university level.
That makes sense. University classes often tackle complex, sometimes sensitive stuff as part of intellectual inquiry.
Right.
However, the OCR also seemed to indicate that broader definitions of harassment and discrimination at the university level could still have implications for classroom instruction.
Yes, and this is really where the analysis from the Committee on Academic Freedom, the CAF, becomes particularly relevant.
Okay, let's talk about CAF.
So this raises a critical question for places like Maricopa. How do these very broad directives impact those fundamental principles of academic freedom?
Right.
The Committee on Academic Freedom, CAF, it was formed back in summer 2020. It's co-chaired by a faculty member and the provost.
And it's a mix of people.
Yeah, 20 faculty and administrators from across the district, representing a pretty wide range of perspectives.
And their white paper makes it clear their main concern isn't pushing a specific viewpoint, right? It's about safeguarding academic freedom.
Exactly. Those 4 core pillars: freedom of instruction, freedom of research and publication, freedom of intramural expression, and freedom of extramural expression.
Their guiding idea being that academic freedom ultimately serves the public good, fostering exploration, pursuing knowledge.
That's their stated belief, yes.
So let's dig into their analysis. How might this Dear Colleague letter affect each of those pillars? Starting with freedom of instruction.
Okay. Well, what's interesting is how different places initially read the letter. CAF points out some universities nationally kind of misinterpreted it.
How so?
They mistakenly thought it required them to eliminate courses focusing on race, ethnicity, gender, identity, those kinds of subjects.
Yeah.
Some even started revising courses.
But that wasn't the case at Maricopa.
No. The Maricopa Chancellor's guidance specifically did not mention curriculum. And faculty have apparently received assurances that any future curriculum changes will follow the established faculty-driven processes.
Which CF supports.
Yes, CF strongly supports that faculty control over curriculum.
That's definitely a positive sign. Curriculum decisions really should rest with the faculty experts.
Agreed.
But, as Heath points out, even without direct orders on curriculum, those OCR FAQs could still influence how faculty choose to teach, couldn't they?
That's the concern, yes. They cite examples of what the OCR calls school-on-student harassment that might become problematic under this new guidance.
Like what kind of examples?
Things like privilege walks, mandatory programs that might emphasize racial stereotypes, or coursework that differentiates assignments or expectations based on race.
So, teaching about privilege isn't banned, but maybe certain methods of teaching it could be tricky now.
Precisely. That seems to be the nuance. Certain pedagogical approaches might be interpreted differently under this revised framework.
Is it complicated?
Very. And it's crucial to remember, as CAF reminds us, there are currently federal lawsuits challenging the legality of this whole Dear Colleague letter.
Oh, right. So this isn't necessarily settled law yet.
Exactly. Well, the OCR's interpretation is, the operative guidance for now. Its legal standing is actually being contested in court, which adds another layer of complexity.
Definitely something to watch. Okay, let's turn to freedom of research and publication. This seems like another area with tangible impacts.
It appears so. The Chancellor's email, as we mentioned, announced limits on professional growth funds for DEI-focused events, specifically those centered on race, identity, or national origin.
Right.
Yes. And the Faculty Professional Growth Travel Committee, the FPG committee, they further clarified this. They now require faculty to attest, basically sign off, that any event they want funding for aligns with the OCR's guidelines.
But is there any flexibility?
Well, they did acknowledge that faculty might have valid academic reasons to attend conferences centered on racial or cultural studies.
Oh, okay.
Provided, of course, that the event is relevant to their specific discipline and, importantly, is open to everyone.
So it sounds like an attempt to navigate compliance while still sort of supporting academic work in those areas.
That seems to be the goal, yes. Trying to find that balance.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act, though.
It is. And CIF acknowledges, look, institutions have a right to manage their professional development funds. Institutional neutrality is a valid point.
Yeah.
But they also argue if an institution does choose to support research, any limits on that support really ought to be content neutral, within the bounds of the law.
Which brings up some practical questions, doesn't it?
It certainly does. How will this OCR directive actually be applied? Scholarship is often interdisciplinary, right?
Yeah.
So how narrowly will they interpret the connection to someone's main discipline? And who decides which disciplines can legitimately study racial or cultural studies?
Great questions.
CAF also wonders if the FPG committees are making a clear enough distinction between formal research and publication activities and maybe broader professional development.
Is there any good news there?
Well, they do note that the FPG processes are generally iterative, kind of back and forth, and supportive for faculty who have concerns. So there's a process.
Okay, that's somewhat reassuring. And the implications go beyond just travel money, right? Internal resources, too.
That's another point CAF raises. They express hope that the protection for research and publication also covers internal stuff, like access to institutional data or library materials needed for research.
Makes sense.
And they're actually planning to release a guidance paper on that specific topic, institutional research support, soon.
Oh, that sounds like it'll be a really valuable resource for faculty navigating this.
It does. It just highlights the ongoing efforts within the district to grapple with these complex issues while trying to uphold academic freedom principles.
Okay, so that covers instruction and research. What about the other pillars? Freedom of intramural and extramural speech.
Right. So the Residential Faculty Agreement, the RFA, clearly protects faculty's right to express themselves as citizens, that's your extramural, outside the institution speech, and also to speak freely on matters of institutional governance, that's intramural, inside speech.
And KF's analysis says these freedoms haven't been restricted by these recent developments.
That's their assessment, yes. Which is a significant point. These fundamental freedoms remain intact, according to CCAF.
Okay.
However, they do stress the distinction between the two types of speech.
How so?
For extramural speech, speaking as a private citizen, it's really crucial for faculty to clarify that their views are their own, not the institution's, especially if it's a context where people might get confused.
That seems like standard practice, but maybe more important now.
Perhaps emphasized more now, yes. And what makes this interesting is the challenge sometimes of defining when a faculty member is off the clock for extramural speech.
Yeah, that can be blurry.
The RFA does define a day-for-day program faculty, which gives some structure, but it isn't always perfectly clear-cut.
And intramural speech, speaking on internal matters.
That's generally okay anytime it aligns with professional duties and shows good judgment. So, voicing an opinion on curriculum during a curriculum committee meeting, appropriate.
But maybe not during a lecture on a totally different topic.
Exactly. Probably not the best time or place if it's unrelated and takes away from the main purpose. Good judgment is key.
Okay. So, as we kind of wrap up CAF's analysis here, what are the main takeaways, the concluding thoughts?
Well, CAF acknowledges the very serious existential threat, that's their term, that the OCR letter poses, given how much the institution relies on federal student aid.
They understand the pressure the administration was under?
Yes, they express empathy for the difficult decisions made in response to this federal directive.
But they also have concerns.
They do. They voice serious concern about what they call the chilling impact they've already seen on faculty scholarship and teaching.
Just from this letter?
Not just from the letter. They see it stemming from the letter itself, but also fitting into a broader context of other recent events.
Like what?
They mention things like arrests of immigrant students and faculty, DEI-related executive orders, increased scrutiny of federal grants from NIH and NSF, funding issues at places like Columbia, changes at the Smithsonian.
So they see this as part of a larger pattern potentially affecting academic work.
It seems that way, yes.
Yeah.
CFR firmly believes that academic freedom is crucial for the common good.
And that government censorship is dangerous.
Their argument is that any governmental attempt to censor what can be taught and learned ultimately censors thought and speech itself, and they see that as violating fundamental American principles.
What's their hope moving forward?
They express hope that established legal precedents, the ones protecting these freedoms, will ultimately hold up in those federal court challenges we mentioned earlier.
Okay. And for our listeners who want to dive deeper into CF's analysis, or maybe for faculty here at Maricopa who feel their own academic freedom has been impacted, what should they do?
CF encourages everyone to visit their website. It has detailed information on their analysis and activities.
We can link that.
Yeah. And faculty members who believe their academic freedom has been infringed upon are encouraged to submit a rich request for assistance through that website. And they also welcome questions or comments via their dedicated email, dl-caf@maricopa.edu.
This has been a really, really valuable exploration of what is clearly a complex and rapidly evolving situation.
It really is.
The Dear Colleague letter and the Maricopa District's response, they raise such fundamental questions about balancing federal mandates with the core principles of academic freedom that, really underpin higher education.
Absolutely. And what's significant here, as you said, is that this is an ongoing story.
Right.
With those legal challenges to the letter still pending and that upcoming CAFA guidance paper on research support, we can definitely expect more developments. And these will have important implications, likely not just for Maricopa, but for colleges and universities across the country.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? How can educational institutions effectively navigate these kinds of federal requirements while still upholding their commitment to academic freedom and fostering that robust, open exploration of diverse perspectives that's just so vital for a well-informed society?
It's the central tension, isn't it?
It really is. Definitely worth considering all the different facets of this issue we've touched on today and, continuing to follow how it develops based on your own interests and your own perspective.